Hello everyone and welcome to RPGs with Paddy. I'm Paddy. So today we're going to be continuing our series for new Gamemaster Month, and we will start off with, or we will go to the start of week 2 here. So if you're not following this, the link is in the description below if you want to try running a game in a new system for the first time. Check it out. So here we are, and in week 2, there's not so much general information, and we'll get into the specifics. But the great thing that they're saying here is that the preparation you do for your chosen game now will help you not only with that game, but you will learn transferable skills to a wide variety of other RPGs, which will help you feel confident trying out new systems. So what are the most important things? So the two things I say here are a strong enough foundation in your rules and setting so that you don't slow down the game recalling or looking up key information, and confidence in that foundation. You don't need an encyclopedic knowledge of every facet of the rules or game universe. So what they're saying here is if you have a feeling for the flow of a game and you generally understand the rules, when something unknown comes up, they want to instill in all of us the confidence to make a decision to keep the game flowing, basically. You don't have to know every single rule, but you have to have an idea for the game system so that you can make a quick ruling rather than slowing down the game. So by doing some good prep, especially at the start when you're learning a new system, you will get a feel for the flow of the game, and you'll be able to judge when it's right to slow the game down to confirm a ruling, or use a temporary ruling to keep the game going smoothly. And it's almost always the latter. Use your judgment to keep the game running relatively smoothly, and don't worry if you end up making some mistakes. You're the game master and you're in control of how the game goes. Okay, so for Numenera, we have a little bit of work to do this session. The first thing is watching this video. So as I say here, it's about half an hour long, so watch it when you have the time. And so I'll just talk about the key points here. In this, we see a group of players playing the game with Monty Cook, the creator of the game, running them through as the game master. So in this video, you can get a little bit of information about the setting, which goes through what we looked at last time, mostly. You can also see something important is that the players are asking a lot of questions, especially when they're trying to reduce the difficulty level of something. They're asking to get information, and can I use this skill to reduce the difficulty? Or I'm skilled in this, does that make a difference? We also learned that there are 3 core class types: Glaive, Nano, and Jack. You don't need to know anything about them yet anyway. And they go through the concept of the difficulty system. This is also a good example. The GM knows the player's stats, what they're trained and specialized in. This is something that can be really great for a first-time game, which it helps the players understand the system without having to check their sheets too much. So especially if you're using pre-generated characters, or if your players have sent their character sheets to you in advance, just take a quick note of what they're trained in, what they're specialized in. And so then you presumably know the rules a lot better than they are. So if they don't pick up on something, you can suggest, oh, you're skilled in this, so we'll reduce the difficulty level. Another part in the video which I thought was interesting is that it emphasizes that not all creature interactions need to be combat, and that this is a game of exploration and investigation. You find something that you know might be dangerous, but you want to find out anyway, and that's the spirit of the game. It might end up hurting you, but you want to find out. And especially about the all creatures not being combat. That is very important because a lot of people, when they're playing role-playing games for the first time, they come in with a video game mentality that all creatures are there to be killed. And that is also commonly how a lot of creatures are played in games like Dungeons and Dragons as well. So it's good to have this introductory video where you see not all strange creatures are there to be fought. Okay, so after that it goes through the combat example, emphasizing that the players make all the rolls. It also explains a little bit how armor works, including the explanation of ambient damage. This is basically damage that ignores armor. Although for new Gamemaster Month, I don't think we need ambient damage. So yeah, the video itself is well worth a watch. You don't have to understand everything that's going on. That's just fine. Just get a bit of a feel for the flow of the game. So up next, we are going to look at Chapter 8. And we're going to read up until, but not including, ambient damage. So Chapter 8 is page 100. Okay, so the first thing we get, I'll just zoom in for a little bit, is how the game works. And we get these 6 steps. First, the players tell the GM what they want to try to do. Then the GM will determine if there's a chance of failure. If there's a chance of failure, the GM will determine what stat to use and the difficulty. The player and the GM determine if the character has any way to reduce the difficulty. And from that, the GM will determine the final target number that the player has to roll. The player rolls a d20, and if it is equal to or greater than the target number, they succeed. Just one thing I want to talk about here is great. The game starts off with number 1 here. The player tells the GM what they want to do. They don't describe a stat or a skill or any kind of mechanic there. They are just describing what they want to do. This is really immersive. It helps the player stay in character and just describing their actions, kind of ignoring the mechanics of it. The GM will then determine what is the most appropriate stat to use, because the GM has more information and generally knows the rules better. But apart from that, some actions don't require rolls. We just say, no, that's fine. There's no risk of failure. Or it's a very routine task. And some actions, on the other hand, require a minimum spend of might, speed, or intellect points. If your character can't spend them, then they will automatically fail that task. Generally, tasks fall into might tasks, speed tasks, and intellect tasks, depending if they are physical strength checks, speed, dexterity checks, or mentally challenging tasks. So there is a nice page here as well, which has the key concepts for different words that you might need to use throughout. You don't need to read through it now, but just keep it handy going forward. Page 101 here. It will be very useful referring back to that going forward. So as the GM, the most frequent thing you will have to do is to assess the difficulty level. The difficulty level does not scale with character tier or character level. It just depends on the difficulty of the task being attempted. So low-level characters trying to do something impossible will face the same difficulty level as high-level characters doing something equally difficult. The only difference is that higher-level characters will have maybe a better chance to succeed, depending on their skills and experience. So when the GM sets the difficulty, never take the character into account. So you just look at the basic idea, climbing this wall, opening this shut door. So this is important because it really allows the player to join in the game a lot more, explaining how their different skills and experience make the task easier for them. And this will really help the player get more immersed in their character and their background and all of their skills. So as we've read before, there are 3 ways to alter to ease a task, and they will be using skills, using assets, and using effort. So skills are something that we are skilled in anyway, and that's simple enough. We've talked about those. If you're trained in climbing or if you're specialized in climbing, the difficulty will be reduced by 1 or 2 steps. An asset is an item or an ally that helps with the task. For example, opening a jammed door might be difficulty 4, but having a crowbar will reduce the difficulty to 3. Usually, assets reduce the difficulty by 1, rarely by 2, and you can never reduce the difficulty by more than 2 with assets. If you have 2 assets that will both reduce the difficulty by 1, they will combine to reduce the difficulty by 2. If you have 3 assets, you can't use them all. Only a maximum of 2 difficulty levels it can be reduced by. Effort, on the other hand, it illustrates a player trying harder and focusing on a specific task. They will spend points from their stat pool to do this, depending on what task it is. If it's a might task, so something using their physical strength, then you would have to use your might pool. To reduce difficulty requires 3 points of effort for the first level of difficulty and 2 points of effort for every subsequent level. So to reduce the difficulty by 1 level costs 3 points. To reduce the difficulty by 2 levels costs 5 points. And to reduce the difficulty by 3 points costs 7 points. 3 levels cost 7 points. But you are also limited by your level. A first level character can only spend 1 level of effort on a task. So you might also have modifiers to your roll, and you add them up after you roll to see if you beat the target number. If you have multiple modifiers and they add up to 3, don't have the modifier, just reduce the difficulty by 1 step. So in general, your total modifier will be 0, +1, or +2. You won't have a +3 modifier. So the special numbers that players can roll are 17, 18, 19, 20, and 1. So these represent the numbers that appear on the dice, not including any modifiers. So if you roll a 1, then the Game Master makes a free GM intrusion. So this is where the Game Master introduces a complication to your situation and doesn't have to award any XP. In general, the GM can have an intrusion at any point, but then they have to give you XP. But if you roll a 1, they will bring in an intrusion and they don't have to give you any XP. On the other hand, if you roll a 17, if it was an attack roll, you do +1 damage. If you roll an 18, if it's an attack roll only, +2 damage. 19, if it's an attack roll, +3 damage or another minor effect. If it's not a combat roll, then it will have some other minor effect. And if you roll a 20, if it was an attack roll, you get +4 damage or a major effect. And if it's not combat, it will have some other major effect. Also, if the player spent any points from a stat pool for this challenge and they rolled a 20 on the die, those points are replenished. So if you spent, for example, let's say 5 points from your stat pool, but you rolled a natural 20, those 5 points will go back into the pool. If you want to retry a failed task, you can, but you have to spend at least 1 level of effort to do it. Sometimes the GM might rule that it's impossible, such as trying to bribe an official after you've already failed with a bribe. Obviously, this does not apply to combat, where you miss 1 round and you attack again the next round. There's no extra requirements for subsequent attacks. So the GM can also say that there is just a cost to trying the task. This is called an initial cost. Where are we here? Here we go. So this is called an initial cost. The example given in the book here is forcing open a heavy iron door. It will be difficulty 5, and it has an initial cost of 3 might points. So to even attempt it, you have to spend 3 might points. But that does not reduce the difficulty of the test. If you want to reduce the difficulty, you would have to spend an additional 3 points, or use some other method. There's also a little bit here about using your edge, but we haven't covered that yet. I assume we'll cover that later in the course, or that it won't be relevant for our starter adventure. But I think it will be. But I will skip it for now, as we haven't covered edge rules yet. So again, we get the same explanation that we've done already about the 4 distances. And we also get a little bit more information about timekeeping, but it's pretty much the same as present-day Earth. The days are 28 hours long, and there are only 312 days in the year, although later it says 313. So when you're having an encounter is generally, a round is generally 5 to 10 seconds long, and each character can take 1 action. If you're in a very small distance, so if you're an immediate distance, you can move and do an action, and you can move and do an action, or do an action and then move. To determine the initiative order, there is an initiative roll. So everyone will make a speed roll. A character who rolls higher than an NPC takes their action before the NPC does. And the target number will be 3 times their level. So using the level 2 bandit from before, the target number will be 6. So anyone who rolls 6 or higher, you will go before the NPC bandit. Then the NPC will go, and then anyone who rolled lower than the target number will go after that. Generally, unless there is a major change in the scene, the initiative order will remain the same throughout the encounter. So anything your character does in a round is an action. The most common actions are, and we can see them here, attack, activate a special ability, move, wait, defend, and do something else. So attacks are pretty straightforward, but if a player character gets injured, they subtract points from one of their stat pools, usually might. NPCs don't have stat pools, they just have health, which is usually equal to their target number. So a level 2 bandit would generally have 6 hit points. Each time a character takes damage, they subtract the armor value from the damage before reducing their stat pool or health. And here we get a little bit of basic information about armor. Light armor gives 1 point of armor, medium armor gives 2 points of armor, and heavy armor gives 3 points of armor. And there are a few other ways that you can get armor. For example, a sheen of ice or something like that, a force field. And these different kinds of armor will stack. Okay, and now we come to ambient damage, which means that we are at the end of this part for this session. There is one more thing that we should look at, which is Chapter 9, Living in the Ninth World. So this Chapter 9 helps you get a feel for the Ninth World and how to evoke its sense of wonder in your players. So there are a few things that we know about the previous civilizations. So this list here. At least one civilization, previous civilization, was the center of a galactic or maybe intergalactic spacefaring empire. At least one wielded the power of planetary engineering and stellar lifting. So as I mentioned before, this book is great for having this little sidebar here, which explains terms that are explained elsewhere, or it gives you a definition of maybe unknown terms. For example, I didn't know Planetary engineering is changing the climate and topography of a planet and perhaps even its position in space. Stellar lifting is moving a star or changing the chemical composition or otherwise modifying the energy output of a star. Great. At least one had knowledge of the fundamental forces of reality and could alter those forces as they wished. The very laws of physics were theirs to play with, like toys. At least one filled the world with invisible molecule-sized machines called nanites, or nanomachines, that could deconstruct and reconstruct matter and manipulate energy. At least one explored the multiverse of other dimensions, parallel universes, and alternate levels of reality. And at least some of these civilizations were not human. So what we know is that the Earth is mostly one supercontinent, with the rest of the world just an ocean dotted with small islands. So as mentioned before, the measures of time are generally pretty similar to present-day Earth, but with 28 hours in a day, and as I mentioned before, 313 days, whereas previously it said 312. I'm not sure if that's a typo or a deeper mystery. So the ninth world is a young society still, and people use whatever resources they have on hand, and they use their understanding of the world to create their life. One of the main resources available to people are the Numenera. People don't really know what they are or how to use them, but the Aeon priests have some vague guesses as to how they might be used. So the denizens basically wear fabrics with relics of the past interwoven into them. They forge materials together, which might be metals, but also non-metals, such as glass, stone, bone, flesh, and other categories. So here we also see, I believe this is the steadfast and the beyond. This is probably the steadfast here, and the beyond goes beyond that. So most denizens of the planet are human, but there are several abhumans and visitants too, as we already discussed in the introduction. But life in the ninth world is pretty similar to human life in 1000 AD, so the Middle Ages. And most people live in small villages where farming, trade, and music are major parts of life. The largest city in the Steadfast is Key, which has a population of about 500,000 people. Generally, humans are separated into aristocrats, peasants, or slaves. In some places, there is also a middle or a merchant class. Only the nobles can own slaves, and the slaves are usually conquered enemies or their descendants, because children of slaves are born into slavery. There is no major widespread religion, apart from the semi-religious scientific religion of the Order of Truth, which is the Aeon priests trying to understand the Numenera and the past, basically. After that, we have an interesting debriefing here about the development of language across eons. The truth is a language which is used and taught by the Aeon priests, based on rationality and intellect. It's easy to teach and learn, and it's the predominant language in the Steadfast. Shin talk is the other major language used here, and it's a crude and simple language used for trade, and it's not so widely used. But actually there are at least 500 different languages in use in the ninth world. But the ability to read is quite rare. Even in the Steadfast, which is where literacy would be at its highest, the literacy rates are only about 50%. And animals through the eons have transformed beyond our recognition of modern day Earth. But the general types and classifications still remain. For example, mammals, reptiles, insects, and birds. Something might be described as a deer because it vaguely resembles a deer, but really at this stage it's changed that it's quite different. There are also some new and alien creatures that don't compare to anything we know today, and also some maybe semi-mechanical creatures as well. In the ninth world, recorded history began about 900 years ago, with the precursor of the Aeon Priests. They started writing down history. No one really knows about the past and where they came from. The first Amber Pope organized the Aeon Priests, as they are currently constructed, about 400 years ago. After that, we get in this gazetteer a very useful kind of rundown of the state of affairs in the Ninth World. It covers a lot of things that we already know, but I'll just draw attention to the second column here because I think there's some new information here. So where did I see? By decree of the Amber Pope, the Steadfast and the Order of Truth wage war with the lands to the north, believed by many to be enthralled by a secretive and mysterious cult called the Gaians. Nobles in the Steadfast are called to the Crusades, making war against the infidels with ever stranger weapons discovered or devised by the priesthood. Outside the bounds of the Steadfast lies the Beyond, a vast wilderness punctuated by very occasional, very isolated communities. The Beyond also has Aeon Priests, but they are not linked by an organized network, and they don't answer to the Amber Pope. Instead, these priests dwell in sequestered claves. Around these claves, small villages and communities known as aldea have arisen. And again, we can see over here, great little side note, an aldea is a village in the Beyond centered around a clave of Aeon priests. Clave, let's go clave. Each clave has discovered and mastered various Numenera items, giving every aldea a distinct identity. In one, the inhabitants might raise unique bioengineered beasts for food. In another, people may pilot gravity-defying gliders and race along the rooftops of ancient ruins. In still another aldea, the priests of the clave may have developed the means to stop the aging process almost entirely, making the residents nearly immortal. And some are no doubt willing to sell the secret for a staggering price. Because the aldea are remote and separated by dangerous distances, trade of these discoveries is occasional and haphazard. But not every village or tribe in the Beyond has a clave to help guide them amid dangers of the past. Some of these communities have tried to use the Numenera to their peril, unleashing horrors, plagues, or mysteries beyond comprehension. Travelers might find a village where the residents have been transformed into flesh-eating monstrosities, or one whose populace works as slaves for a machine intelligence left over from an earlier era. Outside the aldea and other settlements, the dangers multiply. Amid the ruins of the past lurk tribes of vicious abhumans that are as likely to kill and eat an explorer as talk to her. Clouds of tiny invisible machines called the Iron Wind scour the wilderness, altering everything they touch. Monstrous predators, ancient death machines, and stranded extraterrestrials or transdimensional beings, also called ultradimensional beings or ultraterrestrials, also threaten the uncharted reaches of the Beyond. But so too can a careful, capable explorer find awe-inspiring Numenera that can accomplish anything they might imagine. In the Ninth World, the Numenera is both the risk and the reward. So I think that gives you a really nice flavor for the setting and what the game wants to accomplish, this sense of wonder and exploration. So finally we get a little bit about the weather and the climate, but it's pretty much as you'd expect, with some cool additions like the oily black rains that will kill crops, weird magnetic fluctuations, and of course, as mentioned above here, the Iron Wind as well. These are clouds of dangerous nanospirits, and they warp everything they touch and usually kill any creature they come into contact with. So now a lot of the information was quite similar to what we've done already, but now we have a little bit more information about how to run a game, the actual rules that are used to run a game of Numenera. So with that, we should be able to start digging into the rules a little bit more and start preparing for our game. So if you're enjoying this, please leave a thumbs up and maybe think about subscribing to the channel. If you're going through this program as well, if you're learning Numenera, let me know about it in the comments, and I will see you next time. Okay, thank you everyone. Bye.